Hello again, everybody. Thanks for your patience. We'll get started now. We're giving people a little bit of time to join us. So, as the title says, we're looking at remote working, in particular Windows Virtual Desktop, with a focus on the not-for-profits. CubeSys has been working in this sector for quite a while now, and we think that WVD has got a powerful story to tell in the not-for-profit sector. Let me try and. So our agenda will be, I'll give you a quick intro to CubeSys and what we're about, where we work and who we've worked with. And then I'm going to hand over for the main session to George. George is one of our senior cloud consultants and has worked on over 20 projects in the last few months to enable Windows Virtual Desktop in Azure for our client base. So he's going to take you through a bit of an introduction to Windows Virtual Desktop and some of the technical capabilities, and then provide you with a demo. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get going. We would love to hear from you. So there is a Q&A box on there. So please ask some questions along the way, and we'll, because it's a live event, we'll try and answer those at the end. And we'd love to hear if you've got any suggestions for follow-up sessions or further questions for us directly. But do use that Q&A box to try and interact with us, and we'll do our best to answer your questions. This session will be recorded, so we'll put that up on our YouTube channel and contact you with the full session afterwards. So if you don't have the opportunity to take notes, don't worry, we'll look after that and make sure you get all the content shortly afterwards. Okay, so who are CubeSys and who do we work with? For those of you that don't know CubeSys, we've been a dedicated Microsoft partner now for over 8 years with a number of gold competencies. And we've worked with, well, pretty much everybody from large enterprises and government departments down to smaller entities. And in particular, in the last sort of 18 months or so, we've focused heavily on the not-for-profit. Part of our company values was that we wanted to give back to the community, and one of the ways that we feel that we can do that best is to actually interact with not-for-profit organisations and help support their IT needs. So we have quite a few success stories around that, and have been helping them get the most out of the Microsoft cloud services. Well, as I just alluded to, we're very focused on the Microsoft ecosystems, and in particular Microsoft Azure and Microsoft 365. Microsoft 365 obviously encompasses Windows 10, Office 365, and the Security and Identity Suite, EMS. And that, combined with our skills in helping people go to Azure, make sure that they get their cloud governance right, and we get the best out of the platform, is a big focus area for CubeSys. So you can see with those two sort of core areas of our business, bringing them together to provide our clients with Windows Virtual Desktop, as George will be explaining to you shortly, is very much a sweet spot for us. We've got a lot of experience in that area. The words there at the bottom is our company values. So we really do believe that we should be democratizing secure cloud solutions for all organizations, not just the big organizations that can afford it, but we believe we can bring those skills, knowledge and capabilities down at a good price point to all enterprises and all businesses. Just a bit of a comment on where the cloud is going in particular desktop as a service. So desktop as a service, or VDI, is going to be the most significant growth area for cloud technologies in the coming year. Right? And we've seen already in 2020 a 95.4% increase in that. So it's a huge area of interest for a lot of organizations. I think it brings together that scalability of cloud with traditional VDI capabilities. And it gives us a whole new way of tackling that area, and it's a really exciting time to be bringing desktop services into cloud. And we're definitely seeing that with our client base. So there's a lot of interest in there as people move away from that on-prem systems to a very flexible and agile approach that cloud allows us to deliver. And that's exactly what George is going to tell you about in this session. So with that, I'm going to hand over to George, who will take you through the basics of Windows Virtual Desktop. We're going to explain some of the background of the technology stack, and then we'll get into some demos and things as well. So over to you, George.
Thanks, Paul. Hi, everyone. Just a bit of background around me. My name is George Zakowski. I'm one of the senior cloud consultants here at CubeSys. I've been working in the end user computing space for over 12 years now, and using tools like VMware Horizon, Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktops, SCCM, Intune, and as of recent, WVD. So I've done a lot of projects over the past 12 months. Like Paul said, I've implemented about 20 WVD solutions for a lot of our clients, so I'm very familiar with the technology stack. Just a little bit around the agenda today. So I'll give you an introduction on what WVD is, some of its benefits, preparation and implementation steps, and a live demo of basically the WVD portal, how to create a WVD host pool, assigning desktops and applications to users, some application masking using FSLogix, and some Teams optimization. So just to start off, what is virtual computing, right? We all know that, there's virtual computing in Azure, there's virtual computing on-prem, but basically as a general sort of overview, virtual computing allows your computer users remote access to software applications and processes when they need it, and users gain access via an internet through a wireless or network server. This is what a traditional VDI sort of on-prem looks like. This example is from VMware, so this is using their VMware Horizon View software technology stack, and basically here we have a whole bunch of on-premise servers or hypervisors that are running guest operating systems, and they're basically all connected to SAN storage. There's a bunch of other stuff in the background, like fast network switches, 10 gig connectivity, all of this sort of complex setup, and all of this on-prem stuff would include brokers, database servers, redundant links. And then I guess one of the big sort of key components here is if a user is logging into a VDI environment, generally it's a one-to-one mapping with client operating systems. Unless you're running a server operating system with RDS licensing, you're generally tied down to that sort of one-to-one mapping, with Windows 10 and Windows 7. What Windows Virtual Desktop gives you is it basically delivers the only multi-session Windows 10 experience. So we're basically running Windows 10 in Azure, but we're allowing 5, 10, 15, 20 users, however much you sort of scale up to on a single session host. There's also some optimizations for Microsoft Office 365. You can migrate any sort of current Windows Server RDS desktops and apps to the WVD environment. You can deploy in minutes, so it's got that auto scaling functionality. There's again the multi-session and the single session Windows 10 support. So if you have some power users, you can sort of give them a one-to-one mapping of a Windows 10 VM. But then if you've got some light users that basically only require internet access, or you've got contractors or things like that, you can sort of put them on a single Windows 10 session host and cram more users that way and save costs. Another benefit of going to that Windows Virtual Desktop is if you're running Windows 7, you get free Windows 7 extended security updates. So as you all know, Windows 7 support ended, I think it was last year. So they're basically giving you that extended security updates if you were to run your workloads in Azure. The other thing that Windows Virtual Desktop supports is basically your full desktop user experience. You can also publish remote applications. You can publish a persistent or a non-persistent desktop, and then you can have your dedicated or your multi-session user experiences. Some more additional benefits around Windows Virtual Desktop is there's optimization for the Office 365 Pro Plus stuff with FSLogix, the Microsoft Teams optimization, for video and voice calls. It supports Server 2012 R2 and up. It's one of the most flexible service, allowing you to virtualize, both applications and desktops. So you can push applications from a single session host, but you can also have those users log into that session host if they prefer to have that sort of full, desktop experience. It also integrates with the security and management of Office 365. And any sort of policies that you have currently in Azure, such as conditional access and multi-factor authentication, can still be applied to those WVD session hosts. So if you've got contractors and things like that coming in from a unsecure environment, you can prompt them for that sort of two-factor authentication to ensure that it is indeed who they say they are. So here is, I guess, a traditional RDS environment that you have on-prem. When deploying something like this on-prem, you need to sort of outline and look at all of the features listed here. So you'd need to look at, your entitlement, your brokering, your image management, whether it's Windows 10, Windows 7 Server OS. There's additional licensing and maintenance with that. Your network needs to be able to cater for all the backend storage that where your user data is being hosted. And you'd also need to have, some pretty grunty servers and storage and hosting platforms. So pretty much all of your on-prem stuff needs to be managed by you. Where Windows Virtual Desktop comes in is basically the entitlement and the image management is managed by you, the customer. Everything else is now managed by Microsoft. So things like the gateway brokering, the licensing, the diagnostics, they're all provided as a service in Azure, and there's no need to deploy and maintain any on-premise infrastructure. Windows Virtual Desktop can also leverage Azure Active Directory as the identity provider. So it allows you to leverage additional security controls like multi-factor authentication or conditional access. And WVD is a lot easier to deploy versus your RDS on-prem because you're literally only managing those two blue tiles there, the entitlement and the image management.
Just before you move on, George, I think it's a really important point to hit home on. So what Microsoft have done by moving DAS or VDI, whatever you want to call it, to Azure into the cloud, what it means is that we don't have these huge infrastructure costs to set up things on-prem, and that was often a huge barrier to people and a barrier to entry. So we can literally get down to one person or one VM, right, and still have a cost-effective solution for you. Obviously, as we scale that and scale up and down, it gets even more cost-effective. When you compare that to what we've had to do traditionally on-prem, there was a huge investment. On top of that, so if you think about how much effort it would take to maintain that, right, then and the skills that you needed in-house to be able to do that, that often just sort of put people off. So what we've got now with WVD and the fact that we're taking that to the cloud is a much more flexible solution that is we can ramp up and ramp down as need. So like obviously at the current COVID environment where we've sent people home and to work, we can do that securely now with virtual desktops and not have to worry about security as much because it's just like we were working on the corporate network. And when we don't need them, we scale them back down again. So we can use that auto scaling to make sure that the solution is cost effective. So if you find yourself in a situation where the barrier to entry is too high because it costs too much or it's just too complex technology, I would argue that's now gone. And if you're refreshing your current VDI solutions environment, then I would say don't go and invest in more hardware and all the effort to upgrade them on-prem. Have a strong look at WVD and see if we can use that flexibility in your business. Thanks, George.
Thanks, Paul. So just to, I guess, summarize around, sort of some of the business-specific needs that Paul just mentioned, a perfect example would be, South Australia. They recently went into a 6-day mandatory lockdown, and some of my South Australia customers reached out to me and said, look, we've already got, a WVD environment running that's at a small scale. We've had to send all of our employees home and we need them to access our environment. So are you able to scale up our capacity? So during that week, last week, I was able to scale up to cater for roughly 500-600 users for a particular client. And then come Monday this week, everybody's gone back to work because the mandatory the mandatory lockdown has been lifted. And I've just scaled them back down and
so tell me, George, how long did it take to scale them up?
It took about 45 minutes to scale them up. So I think we managed to deploy about 20 to 30 additional servers in that time. And that was able to cater for an extra 400 users. So it's pretty quick and pretty awesome technology. And now those VMs themselves that were spun up, they weren't running 24/7. They were running during core business hours. And then after hours, they were scaled back down to whatever the customer had set as a minimum. So in this case, it was having 3 VMs running 24/7. But as soon as business hours hit, There's a sort of script that runs in the background, serverless, that basically checks the load on the WVD environment, and it scales up as needed as more users join, or as you get a sort of a boot storm or a bunch of users logging in. So that was pretty cool. So just to recap, depending on your business needs there, if you've got security and regulation that you need to follow, you've got your compliance policies there, you've got your MFA. If you need an elastic workforce, you've got short-term employees or contractors that basically need access to this environment. You could provide a secure, robust work environment for them, whether they're on the go or not. So you can have specific employees that might be working remotely in call centers, or you need to provision something really quickly, or they've got their own device, or they want to log on from a mobile. They can do that, and it doesn't really matter what the client is. I mean, the client can be a full-blown desktop, it can be an iPad, can be a HTML browser. It doesn't really matter, as long as they've got sort of access to an internet-facing device. They can connect to a WVD work environment. And then finally, that last one there, that specialized workload. So if you've got some things that need to be tested sort of at a small scale, and you need to provision something quickly, you can look at using something like that. Or in this case, if you've got some legacy applications that might only run on Windows 7, for example, Microsoft give you that sort of extended security updates for Windows 7, so you can continue running those workloads there until you find a more suitable solution for you. In terms of licensing, if you have any of these licenses listed here for the client, you are essentially covered for the licensing cost of running the Windows 10 Enterprise for Virtual Desktop SKU. So that Windows 10 multi-session SKU, again, if you've got any of those client licenses there, you are technically entitled to run it. Once you've got that, you only pay for what you consume. So basically, depending on the number of VMs or the number of storage, or how big your profiles are, you're only paying for computer and storage. And you can do a pay-as-you-go sort of pay cycle, or you can look at doing 1 year reserved instance or 3 year reserved if you're looking more long term and you want to sort of get a bit of a discount there. If you've got a server operating system and you want to deploy that in WVD, you still need those RDS Cal licenses with the software insurance. So nothing's changed there. But I mean, in terms of management and on-prem infrastructure, you're benefiting a lot of those back-end services.
Yeah, just to reinforce that point. So what Microsoft have done when you're using Windows 10 or Windows 10 multi-session, then you do not need the RDS Cal license, right? So you're licensed through your standard Windows 10 licensing or your M365, etc. But if you do use server operating system in the back, which to be honest, we haven't seen many of our clients do yet,
no.
have we? We've been really focused on that Windows 10 multi-session, but if you were to need to run a server operating system in the back of WVD, which you can do, then of course you would need the server licensing that goes with that, so your RDS Cal. Right? But generally, we'd say that's a significant saving for most of our clients.
Yep, definitely. A lot of our customers will avoiding that whole sort of server-side licensing, because they find that whatever applications they're running in a server environment, that they might need to tweak the certain application to get it to run in an RDS style environment. So if the application runs on Windows 10, you can run it in Windows 10 multi-session. So there's no need really to go to a server operating system unless there is some sort of specific business requirement around that. So some of the prereqs you need to get started with WVD is obviously you need an Azure subscription. You need a Azure Active Directory with Azure AD Connect syncing your users across. It can be on-prem Azure Active Directory, or it can be Azure Active Directory domain services, so the one running in the cloud. You basically need an image, so an SOE. If you are going to a Windows 10 multi-session image, you need to recreate that because that image is only available in Azure. You need a virtual network. Now, if you're a fully cloud, cloud user, you don't need any ExpressRoute or VPNs or anything like that. But if you do have an on-premise network, you do need to have a ExpressRoute or VPN connectivity and line of sight to your domain controllers. You also need some storage, so you can look at storage options like Azure files. You can look at on-prem file servers if you want to go down that path, and you can also look at Azure NetApps. Once you've got some of those prereqs, installed and running and sorted out, you can look at virtualization or how it'll look using Windows Virtual Desktop. So on the left-hand side there, we can see a Windows Server 2019 RD session host. So some of the advantages there is obviously running Server 19. You can use multiple users, have them logging in. You can have an Office 2019 perpetual license, and you got the long-term servicing channel. So that's your RDS style server operating system. Over on the right, we've got Windows 10 Enterprise that can do, single session native support, so a one-to-one mapping. The desktop look and feel is exactly the same like Windows 10. It's basically picking up the machine and putting it in Azure and doing that one-to-one mapping. So you might have some power users that require a machine that that is dedicated to them, and every time they log in, they will always get that same machine. So similar like a personal desktop. You can run Microsoft 365 on there. You can do sort of anything that a Windows 10 machine can do. And then over in the middle, this is the big game changer. It's Windows 10 Enterprise multi-session. So basically, same look and feel as a Windows 10 desktop, but you can now have 5-10 users logging into that single machine and have that same look and feel and consistency from their physical laptop devices over to the WVD environment. So again, you can have multiple users logging in. You can have Microsoft 365 there. You've got all your servicing channels, everything. The way that you manage your Windows 10 devices now, you can manage them in the WVD environment with a multi-session user experience.
And that's nearly every one of our clients has been taking advantage of that, right?
Yeah, definitely. Everybody's getting on board. Some additional optimizations as of, I guess, recently for WVD is now there is full support for audio and video redirection in Microsoft Teams, and that basically includes peer-to-peer optimization. So if I was to make a phone call through Teams, the initial connection will route via the session host itself, but then the actual audio quality and the AV redirection will be from client IP to client IP. So Microsoft has done some smarts around that to basically get better performance out of that. There's also a OneDrive. OneDrive Sync will now run in long persistent environments, and you've also got the sort of the files on demand feature there, so that you're not bringing down the user's entire OneDrive to the session host. When they double click on a file, that's when it downloads it. And then you can also look at leveraging things like FSLogix, which I'll talk a little bit later on about, but that's definitely there. You've also got some improved auto scaling. So basically you can schedule virtual machines to start and stop based on business hours and essentially reduce your cost and complexity. It's also a serverless application, and it's based on the Azure Automation and Logic apps. So during business hours, there are scripts that run in the background that determine how many users are logged into the WVD environment. And if we need more users or we need more VMs to be spun up, that will handle that for you in the back end. And you can also set some limits around how many machines you want, how many users you want per VM and things like that. There's some service tags and URL security in there. So if you're using things like Azure Firewall, you can use these service tags to define what rules and things like that you want to sort of go out through the firewall. It's a click of a button. Microsoft keeps those service tags up to date for you. And there's also some additional service tags in Azure that can be used to apply to your WVD environment as well.
These improvements, George, they've come over the last few months as COVID has hit and Microsoft has focused on WVD and really try to sort of make sure that it's like for like with what the experience we get on our normal laptops and things, right? And I think it's really quite important that these things did happen and they're showing their worth now. Because OneDrive was a problem for a lot of VDI solutions. If you think about that on-prem, it was an issue for us in 365, and that Teams redirection is super important if you want to send people on and give them the same experience. So it's really pleasing to see that they've done that in a few short months. and rolled out that globally. So it's now in place, and there's more coming from Microsoft in that space.
Yeah, they're continuously improving that. So there's always new features and changes coming. So that's the joy of cloud computing. Nothing's ever the same. Next week it can change and we'll get a whole new feature. So it's pretty good that Microsoft are keeping on top of that. I just want to talk a little bit around how sort of the connection flow happens. So essentially, once the environment is spun up, the machines themselves can be, the client themselves can be, anything that can access the internet. So we can have an iPhone, a laptop, a tablet, computer, whatever it is, right?
The browser actually is HTML5 compliant.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, so you could just send someone a URL to the link. And then they can log in, obviously prompted for two-factor authentication if it's an untrusted device or whatever it may be. But you set those policies around that based on your business requirements. So essentially, when the session hosts are spun up, over on the right, we can see desktops. So the desktops basically connect to the WVD broker service and say, hey, I'm available for someone to connect to me. Then we look at number one. So the user launches the remote desktop client, which connects to Azure AD. The user signs in and the Azure AD token returns. The remote desktop client presents token to web access. Broker queries database to determine resources that are authorized for the user. The user selects the resource. The remote desktop client then connects to the gateway. The broker orchestrates connection from the host agent to the gateway. And finally, the RDP traffic now flows between the remote desktop client and the session host VM over connections 3 and 4. So essentially, once that connection is established, your traffic is going through the Microsoft PaaS gateway service through to the desktop that you're connecting to. Now, this middle section here is basically a service that we do not have control over. Microsoft manage and patch that for you. So this is the big key component in Windows Virtual Desktop. You don't need to manage any of those internal database servers, brokers, gateways, things like that. Microsoft are offering it as a PaaS service to you.
And what's the monthly fee for that, George?
Nothing. There's no monthly fee for that. You only pay for what you consume on the customer side. So again, your storage and your compute. Another thing I want to mention here, and this is something that's in public preview at the moment, but there is a RDP short path, which is essentially a new Microsoft technology that allows the WVD session host to, rather than tunneling into the WVD environment via the internet, they can use your existing corporate network if they've got line of sight to then connect directly to the session host. So it'll bypass the Microsoft's gateway server and go directly. So if I'm on a corporate LAN and my data center is in the same building as where I'm connecting from, the RDP short path will essentially initialize the connection from the beginning via the Microsoft gateway services. And then in the background, what will happen is the VM will determine if it's got line of sight to the actual desktop that it's on, providing that all the firewall rules and things like that allow the specific ports that are required. And if that's the case, it will switch over the connection and essentially, RDP into that machine and to the user. It's completely seamless, and it should provide less latency because it's not going through any of the external gateways or via the internet.
It's a good example of how Microsoft are continually improving the service, and that will allow, I think, a lot of large enterprises and corporates to breathe a bit easier on the security front as well, so they can see where the traffic's going.
Yeah, definitely. So again, just some of those network requirements. Just to make clear, the WVD servers or the session hosts require no external ports. So there's nothing that needs to be open. You don't need to open, like port 3389. So the reverse connect technology basically means that your destination VM doesn't need to have any ports open. It only needs port 443 outbound to the Windows Virtual Desktop PaaS service. So essentially what Azure is doing, it's acting as your reverse proxy for RDP traffic. So we as users hit the gateway, the session hosts or the servers that are running in Azure connect to that gateway, and Microsoft fills in that gap for us. So again, no external ports. The network must route to a Windows Server Active Directory or an Azure Active Directory domain server. So it needs to be domain joined somewhere, right? Those VMs need to join a domain, and because you own them, you control them, you can apply group policies and all that good stuff to them.
Yeah, and that's an important point, right, Judge, is that where what we've seen during our response to COVID is most people have just replicated their SOE very, very quickly. Yep. By using the same directory and the same group policies on those WVD hosts.
Yep.
So it's been very, very quick to get people up and running.
Yep, 100%. Just look at, throwing them into sort of the same OU or sub OU of where their Windows 10 machines are, and apply a couple more, sort of hardening policies on there. You might want to look at hiding the C drive or redirecting, client drives to their local device so that your users don't get confused. But it's been pretty simple and fairly easy to set up. Another thing that I just want to note there is that your Active Directory must be in sync with Azure AD so that your users can be associated between Azure AD and your domain controller. So when they log in, they're essentially authenticating twice. The first time round will be to Azure AD, and whatever conditional access or MFA policy you've got applied will still be applied. And then once they go to click on a resource, whether it be an application or a desktop, they will then need to log in again as a sort of a on-prem domain login. So here's basically a high-level sort of service overview. So you as a customer, you basically manage the desktops and the applications, so you manage your policies around the VMs themselves. So you can see that up in the top right-hand corner. So it's your subscription, your control. You deploy whatever operating system you want. You patch it however you want. You look at whatever image, apps, profile management, what size VMs you run, sort of all of that good stuff, right? And then in the bottom right, you can see Microsoft handle everything else. So they will patch, the remote desktop client, they'll patch the gateway, the brokering service, they do all the load balancing for you and all the other smart stuff. You can connect to an on-premise resource via ExpressRoute or VPN if you've got that set up. So you can grab your virtual network running in Azure and connect to your on-prem environment, so that users have then got access to printers and things like that if they're running locally. You can also use Azure user authentication using Azure Active Directory. So again, MFA conditional access. It integrates with SCCM, so System Center Configuration Manager. If you're running that locally, I think it's version 1906 and up now supports WVD. So you can continue using those, ADR rules, those deployments to patch your machines if you want to keep them as a persistent devices. And Microsoft Intune is coming soon, so Microsoft are working hard to try and get some additional policies and patching working for Intune if you want to look at using some of that technology to manage your devices. Another thing here, I haven't come across this personally, but you can now run Linux as well in the WVD environment. So that's something good to know if you have some use cases for that. I just want to talk a little bit around profile management with FSLogix. So basically, in the past, in your WVD environments, or I guess your on-prem environments, if you had any, Citrix had a good example of this using Citrix profile management, and VMware used to have something called User Environment Manager or Dynamic Environment Manager. And they sort of work by, redirecting or setting like mandatory profiles when a user first logs in, or you can use, Microsoft's profile redirection to redirect the user's profile. What FSLogix does is it basically containerizes that profile for the user, and it essentially optimizes that profile for faster login and faster application launch times. That container sits in a VHD file, and it's essentially in the background. What's happening is it's being mounted as a VHD to the session host that the user is connecting to. So nothing needs to copy across. It's sort of like a direct mount, similar to like app vols in the VMware world, if anybody's familiar with that. But it's essentially in the background in Azure. What's happening is the VM's turned on, and that VHD file, whether it's sitting in Azure Files or NetApps or a sort of a file server running in Azure, it essentially just attaches it to the VM. And you can also look at, migrating some of your existing user profiles if that's what you wanted to do. And some of the other sort of key benefit features for FSLogix is you can use Office 365 containerization as well. So you can roam, a user's Office cache data or a user's Outlook PST, OST file, things like that. So, if you don't want to store that stuff on the VM, or you have stateless VMs where you basically destroy on the monthly and recreate and redeploy based on, patch cycles and things like that, the user data does not sit on the virtual machine itself. It's sort of stored in that VHD file.
It's great set of technology, FSLogix, and just to be clear on that point, FSLogix was bought by Microsoft a bit over a year ago, so they obviously saw that as a key component in being able to build the WVD service.
Yeah, really powerful stuff. And it's not just the profile stuff that it does. I'll get into some application masking a little bit later, but it does a couple more things than just profiles. But like I said, the profile is stored in a VHD file. It's mounted at login, right? So it's a fast login. There's no target storage requirement. The size of the profile does not impact the logon time, right? Because remember, it's just a VHD file that's being mounted to the VM. There's no actual copy that comes across. The VHD file itself is block transferred, right? So the changes are made to the VHD, but then it's detached from the user session on logoff. And the profile container basically redirects everything for the user profile. Now, you can also use things like OneDrive as well to do known folder redirection. So if you don't want your user profile stuff to be stored in that VHD file, maybe you've got a file server or Azure Files, you don't want to look at paying for that much cost or whatever because you've already got OneDrive, OneDrive Business, for example, there, with 1 terabyte of storage or whatever it may be. You can redirect all of the users, my documents, pictures, desktop over to OneDrive and then have it sync to the session host as files on demand. And then you can do all the sort of backend stuff. So like application preferences, OST files, any sort of user custom wallpapers, things like that, be stored in the FSLogix profile. This slide here basically is a rough host sizing recommendation. So depending on what kind of workload you're looking for your users, here is the sort of maximum recommendation by Microsoft around how many users you can get on a VM. So if you look at that second one there, the workload type being medium, if you look at the size of the VM, it's one single VM, right? It's a D4S V3 that's got 4 CPUs and 16 gig of RAM. With that, what you can do is you can say the maximum number of users per CPU is 4. So because we've got 4 CPUs in the actual machine, we can get up to 16 users per VM. Now, that's Microsoft's recommendation. You might be able to go more, you might be able to go less. It really depends on what's running in your gold image and what your users are doing. So if they're just your basic sort of office workers, they use sort of Office 365 products and a bit of web browsing, that might be enough, right? They might be running a lot of SaaS applications and things like that. But if you've got some applications like, for example, SAP GUI or something like that, it might be a little bit difficult, or it might require more resources, more RAM. So you might look at bumping up that SKU and or possibly reducing the number of people per host. Another good thing as well is if you've got some sort of power users, and by power I mean AutoCAD, Revit, Inventor, and things like that. Azure offer GPU skewed VMs, so you can now utilize NVIDIA graphics cards in your virtual desktop environment. A couple months ago, when this was announced, I actually jumped into my test tenant, and Microsoft Flight Simulator just happened to come out then. So I installed Microsoft Flight Simulator on an NV6 skewed VM and was able to run that without any issues. And surprisingly, it was a little bit glitchy in the beginning. It was still early stages when it was first released, but I mean, the game was running. It was playable. And I was probably getting about 20 frames per second and that was on the high settings. So if I drop the settings, I'd get a little bit more. But in terms of like latency and things like that, keyboard responsiveness, it was fairly pretty quick. The VM was running in Australia East, and I was in Australia East, so the latency was like 8 milliseconds or something like that. It was really, really low, so that was great. So if you have a use case for that, any sort of Google SketchUp, any sort of those 3D applications that require GPU support, you can definitely use them if you like. MSI App Attach. So this is basically a new technology. So you can use App Attach with FSLogix to do things like application masking and hide applications from specific users. So it's similar to like FSLogix, but you can essentially mask an application that's been attached as a VHD. So an MSIX application is, again, containerization of an application. So it's sort of like attaches on demand on user login. So I guess you can probably say it's similar to like AppV, but it's a VHD that gets attached for the user. Why would you app attach something? Well, if you're app attaching applications, they're not actually installed on your golden image, right? So then you can create a gold image that's fairly vanilla, import all of your MSIX applications, and then use app attach to dynamically attach those applications as the user logs on, depending on what Active Directory group they're in, or if they're a member of some other group, whatever it may be, you can have them dynamically attach. It's clean. It's can be used for physical and virtual environments. It's the new packaging technology from Microsoft, and you can convert a lot of applications that are currently running now into MSIX packages. Master image management. So this is also referred to in some environments as your gold image. So your gold image can be managed, using Azure Update Management. You can use SCCM Configuration Manager to run task sequences and things like that to build it or refresh it on the monthly basis, whatever you like. You can use, third-party tools like Batch My PC, use WSAS. You could use whatever you want to sort of patch it and get it up to standard. There's also some best practice documents online for configuring golden images. So, things like Teams optimization. You can look at some of the Microsoft documents there to optimize Teams for your environment. And you can also use application masking technology. So like FSLogix app masking, where basically you're building a vanilla image and then attaching applications as users log in. And that simplifies your gold image management quite heavily. When patching your machines, some good practice is using one host pool as a pilot group before updating all host pools. So in the WVD environment, you can have 2, 3, 10 host pools, whatever you like, but it's always a good idea to have one host pool as a pilot group, and you can enable sort of host pool validation so that Microsoft knows to push any new feature or flagged updates to those host pools there so that you can test them prior. So one example of that would be Microsoft just released something called, I think it's Start on Demand or Start on Connect or Connect on Start. And it basically says if you have a personal Windows 10 desktop that's running in Azure, that's powered off, right? So it's not running. When the user goes to connect to that VM in the background, it will actually power on that VM for you, and it will, display a message to the user saying, "Oh, we're starting the VM in the background. Please wait," and then it'll bring it online. So some of those new features there, you can have as sort of validation host pools or pilot group host pools. So that's one way of managing them. The other way is, you can use, like I said earlier, SCCM to manage your images. You can use updates that are staged in sort of a maintenance window. So you can use things like drain mode on the session host to stop new users from connecting to existing session host and essentially drain all of those users and force them to start connecting into newly deployed VMs. You can update VMs with existing Azure management solutions, and you can essentially, update all of your VMs in one hit if you sort of wanted to go down that path, sort of have a hard cutover where, you'd have your outage, you'd power off your existing VMs, you'd deploy your new VMs, and do it that way. So what configuration is right for your user requirements? So as I said earlier, specifically talking around Windows 10, you've got your personal desktops and you've got your pool desktops. So your personal desktops are essentially your single session users. And I guess unless you have a specific business requirement or you have some users that have got heavy performance, I would recommend that you go over to the pool desktop side because you get more bang for buck. The whole pool desktop environment allows multiple users to log into a single virtual machine running. So, you'd be able to get more for less. You'd have more users logging into less VMs, whereas if you were to go to personal desktops, it's more so your traditional VDI one-to-one mapping. If you're running Citrix or VMware, Microsoft have partnered with them to basically allow access to the WVD environment. So if you're running Citrix Cloud Management or you're using VMware Cloud or Horizon Cloud, you've got connectors now that essentially allow you to continue using those existing management panes, that you're all familiar with, but you can also now have the option to deploy Windows 10 multi-session VMs from Citrix or VMware management planes. That basically allows you to, continue using your same sort of look and feel management planes, but essentially deploy Windows 10 multi-session VMs in Azure. As I said earlier, Windows 10 multi-session is only available in Azure, and Microsoft are holding to that. So that's why VMware and Citrix are sort of allowing those connectors and those functionality to be able to tap in into the Azure pane and essentially spin up VMs there. All right, I'm going to come to the demo now. So basically what I want to go get done in this demo is show you some of the Azure portal for WVD, how to essentially add applications and desktops to a host board, to a workspace, essentially a demo on application masking and some integration around, what WVD can do for you. So if I minimize my desktop here. So first things first, when accessing the WVD environment, what we can do is we can access it a number of ways: phone, tablet, laptop. We can access it via the remote desktop application that I've got here. So this is the Microsoft Remote Desktop app. There's my Kubesys customer demo tenant, and here we can see all of my applications that I've got access to, and we can also see the Windows 10 multi-session desktop that I can log into if I wanted a full-blown desktop. Now, the other good thing about running this Windows Remote Desktop is if I click on my Start menu, I will also get, if I was to search for paint.net, I can see here that paint.net is part of the Kubesys Cloud. So I can launch this as if this application was natively installed on my computer here. So it integrates with the Windows Start menu so that your users have more of a streamlined approach where they can basically just search for an application and they can launch it this way, or they can go through that remote desktop client. And the third way is via a web browser. So I'll just give you a quick demo on that now as well. To go to the Windows WVD URL here, it's going to ask me to sign in. So just give me a second. That and punch my password in. Stay signed in. So here we go. We can see that I've got the exact same look and feel. So I've got, all my applications listed up the top here, and I've also got that Windows 10 multi-session multi-session desktop that's listed here. So there's a couple of different ways that you can get into the environment. Now, I'm currently inside the network, so my IP address, so I'm in the office today, so my IP address is trusted, so therefore it didn't ask me for MFA. But if I was external, I would have got the prompt, with the text message or the authenticator app. I would have had to provide my token, and then it would have let me in. So that's why that didn't ask me. But essentially, this is the remote desktop WVD client, and it's really, really nice looking, really streamlined, integrated with your start menu, and real easy to use. Before I jump into that environment, I just wanted to bring up the Azure portal and just show you all where or how to access this WVD sort of environment. So up the top here, if we search for Windows Virtual Desktop, this is it. This is where we create our host pools, our application groups, our workspaces, and things like that. So here, if we have a look, I've got a customer demo host pool. If I log into that, we can see that I've got currently one session running at the moment. This is a Windows 10 multi-session host pool. If we look at the overview here, we can see it's pooled. So pooled basically means it's a multi-session environment. We can look at some of the RDP properties, so we can do things like microphone and device, camera redirection, USB redirection, sort of all of the traditional RDS style stuff. You can control that through here. You can also control it through group policies and things that are applied to the actual session host themselves. You can set display settings. You've got some more advanced stuff over here, but that's where you essentially set this per host pool. So if I know that I'm running Microsoft Teams, for example, on this host pool, I might want to turn on the microphone redirection, the camera redirection. That's the host pool there. If I wanted to essentially spin up more machines, I will just click on session host here, click on this add button, and then because I've already added one, a lot of this stuff is already populated and filled in, but I could essentially come here and say, Australia East, I want 10 more VMs. The naming prefix, it remembers it from the last time, so it'll automatically append -0, -1, -2 to the end of the name. And then we can choose what sort of image we want. We can use a gallery, we can use an Azure image, a shared image gallery, we can use blob storage, whatever you like. So you pick that there. As long as your machine is sysprepped, you can use it. Select your networks and sort of all of the standard Azure stuff, and then next, and create, and that will provision a VM for you. Going back, application groups. So here by default, the first one that's always created with a new host pool is this sort of top one here. So that's a customer demo DAG, so it stands for desktop application group, and the one underneath it is a RAG, so it's a remote application group. Now this bottom one I've created custom, and I'll get to that in a second, but let's focus on the desktop first off. So here we can see that we're pushing a desktop application group. Here we can see the friendly name that I've given it here, so Windows 10 multi-session, which is what's reflected over here, Windows 10 multi-session. And then we can come in here and apply assignments to users. So this is where you actually assign users to a desktop to be able to log in. Now, I've given it an Azure AD group, and my username is contained in there. That's why I've got access. But you can now sync Azure AD groups in the WVD portal. This previously wasn't there. And you've got some logging and diagnostics and things like that. I'll cover in another session. The remote application group is essentially where you would apply or publish remote applications. So all of these apps here that are listed are the ones that are showing over in the remote desktop client. If I wanted to add a new application, I could click on the add button here. And then essentially from the drop-down list here, I can either go via the start menu, or I can provide a manual file path if I wanted to. But essentially this just, queries the machine, and I can click, OneDrive and do whatever I need to do, hit save, and then it'll appear in this list over here. For this particular application group, I've given it access to this Kubesys Cloud group. If I had SAP as an example, and I had some finance users that needed to use it, I would, and only have them using it, I would create a separate application group called, SAP or whatever it is, and then maybe give the SAP group access to it. That way, when I log in, I don't see that SAP application. Even though it's coming from the same host pool, I won't see it from the client here. Now, if I was to log in to the Windows 10 desktop environment, yes, I will be able to see it, but that's where application masking comes into play with FSLogix, and I'll give you a demo around that. So here we can see the FSLogix is mounting my profile in the background. It's essentially got that VHD file that's sitting in Azure Files, and it's attaching it to this virtual machine in the background. So as an end user, you don't see anything, you don't notice anything. It just works. Another quick thing to just show you is I'm in Sydney at the moment, and this server is running in Australia East, and the round trip time is 13 milliseconds. So there's not much latency there. Here we can see we're running Windows 10 Enterprise 64. This is our gateway server that we're going through, and a bit of information around our network connection details. If I go over into the System tab, we can see what SKU we're running. So down the bottom, we're running Windows 10 Enterprise for virtual desktops. So we are indeed running a multi-session machine. So let's just say we had an application that we wanted to hide from our end users, right? We already know that we don't need to publish it via the WVD client, but what about when people log in, right? They're still going to see that application there. Well, that's where FSLogix application masking comes in. So if I open up the rule editor, what we can do is we can create a new rule and just say on the desktop here, we'll just call it rules for now. And then jump in here. If we wanted to, for example, I'm going to use paint in this case, but if we wanted to hide paint, we would essentially come over here, find paint in the list. Oop. We're not working. Open. Oops, sorry. It's not a real demo if nothing works, right? That's what I wanted. Okay.
So I know you're selecting the paint application, George, to hide it from users.
I want to hide it from users, yeah.
Using the FSLogix masking capability.
Yep.
It's obviously very useful in VDI solutions where we have an application installed that we want for some users but not other, and it'll help us manage the image, right, by just hiding it away from certain users.
Yeah. Well, the other thing as well is you can use this to essentially, look at doing some FSLogix sort of application masking as well, right? If you want to do that. And what is going on here? It's not actually allowing me to select it. Oh, well, that's great. Try another one. Oh, it's not letting me do it. Oh, what's wrong with it? Essentially, had this worked, you would essentially put the executable path in here, and then from here, what would happen is, here we go. I might be able to get it work now. So you scan there we go. So you scan the application path. It would basically go and sort of look in the Windows registry and see what is related to that specific application. And then I can go over here and say manage assignments. Now I can say for this particular rule set, and this can be any sort of Active Directory groups or anything like that. But in this example, I'm just going to remove everybody and I'm going to add George. That's who I'm logged in as. And I'm going to say this hiding rule applies to George. Let's go with everyone again. Hopefully this works. Like that. So now what I should be able to do is copy this rule set over into the FSLogix application in the rules container. And now there's paint there. If I paste that in there. paint just disappeared. So this particular profile here is applying to everybody, but you can have it applied to a group or a specific user. But I've just hidden paint from the user's start menu. So, I mean, it's there, they can't click it. The application is still installed and still available for other users. But for this particular user or this group or whatever has sort of been applied over here, it is now hidden for that user. And if I wanted to bring that application back, I will just cut these out or delete them or whatever it is. Actually, I've already got a copy of them there. So if I just go back and delete that, we should see paint come back all of a sudden. And there it is there, and I can launch it again. So that's how you would hide applications from an end user when they're logging into the WVD environment as a full-blown desktop. And if you wanted to hide it, you know, from I guess this remote app side of things, you would just create a separate application group and have it hidden from the user there, or just don't even apply it to them and they won't even see it. So that's some of the power around FSLogix and application masking and hiding and things like that. So some pretty cool, great tools around that. Let me see if I can quickly I'll jump off this machine as well. And I just want to quickly demo the Microsoft Teams. If I'm lucky. Actually, I won't demo Teams. I'll demo something else because I'm actually dialed in through Teams, and if I log in, it might disconnect me. So just give me a sec. There we go. Okay. Let's just use Visual Studio Code as an example. So what this is actually doing is it's logging into that same machine in the background that I was just in. If I hit the Show Details button, you can see it actually logging in the background. But to the end user, they'll just see the application launch as if it's natively installed in their environment. Now, I can control access in there, you know, using group policy or whatever it is, and hide the C drive, redirect local drives to the user session so that it's more of a, you know, look and feel like their desktop, so that they're not confused and, oh, hey, I saved something on my desktop, but it's not actually on my physical laptop or whatever it is. So you can do that kind of stuff. But yeah, you'd essentially apply those sort of policies around, you know, what you want to hide and show and make look and feel the same. And here we go. So this is Visual Studio Code being launched from the Windows Virtual Desktop environment. So you see that little icon there, that sort of white with the green. That is the WVD environment there. If I go to open a file in this particular environment here, I've hidden the C drive. I mean, you can still get to it this way, but that's because it's a demo environment, but I could further restrict that if I wanted. But when I go into this PC, I see C drive on CubeSys. So CubeSys is my laptop that I'm actually on, and if I was to jump in there, you know, we'd see all this crap in there. But yeah, I could essentially save that file to my physical device, or save it to OneDrive, or have OneDrive automatically sign in and do all kinds of smart stuff. So that's essentially that WVD environment. Let's go over to questions. I think that there was a whole bunch coming through in the chat.
Yeah, we can run through some of those. Let me. Some of them have been answering as we go along, but let me just recap the questions, George, and we'll get you to answer them.
Yep.
Let's have a look. What's the first one? So when we're using Microsoft Azure platform with WVD, and if Azure went down, what would the backup strategy be? How would we get going in a DR situation?
So with WVD, you can have multi-region support, right? So when you initially go to set up that environment, you'd look at setting up your FSLogix profile container storage. You know, you'd put something like GRS or sort of multi-region support, where you have that replicating across. And the same will then apply for your host pool VMs themselves as well. When you actually go to create a host pool, it gives you the option to select a specific region, but then you can also put them in an availability set. So it would obviously protect against a single host failure. But if an entire region were to go down, you can then look at deploying, VMs in the same host pool in different regions. So you could have, say, if you had 50 VMs that would cater for 500 users, you'd probably put 25 VMs in Australia East and 25 VMs in Australia Southeast, and then that would sort of help you in that scenario there.
So just to add a bit to that, I'll clarify, I'll get you to clarify. So part of the solution with WVD is managed by Microsoft. Now that's a global system across all the Microsoft Azure regions everywhere. So that piece is taken care of by Microsoft, correct?
Correct.
Right.
Yep.
So what we need to do is to be able to DR a particular client's WVD environment is we need to make sure that we have
we need to make sure that we have the available, the available resources in the correct regions, right? So
when we say resources, we're talking virtual machines.
We're talking virtual machines. We're talking
profiles.
Storage profiles. So your profiles live on your storage, but that's essentially it. There's nothing else that you need to manage from a customer's perspective, right?
So we need to basically replicate that storage, and then we could turn it on again.
Yep, exactly right. Yep, that's exactly right.
Excellent. The next question I had in was, what's the requirements from the client side? So mobile devices, Android, laptops, what sort of power do those devices need to be able to run the WVD client?
Nothing. They don't really need anything. So this whole thing, you don't even need to run a client if you want. You can run it directly from a web browser as long as it's HTML5 enabled. You can log into the WVD environment, and all of the processing and things like that obviously happens on the session host running in Azure. So your machine doesn't really need to be doing anything. You can run it from a Raspberry Pi if you really wanted to.
Actually, I know that I've seen on LinkedIn somewhere that somebody was running it from their Tesla.
Yeah.
Right. So I think the answer to that one is that pretty much any client that can run HTML5, or we can install the WVD client on.
Yep.
And there are versions for Android and iPhones, etc. Right, then we can connect through and run pretty much anything.
Yep.
I do remember, George, when you were playing with that flight simulator, you were running that from a browser, so you're actually playing a flight sim through a browser.
Yep, definitely. So yeah, look, as long as you've got a connection to it, you can run it on anything. It doesn't really matter. Like I said, it's literally just sending keyboard and I mean, look, you think about it this way: when you go into watch 4K videos on YouTube, if they can stream to you fine without any delay, it's the same sort of concept here. You're just seeing a picture and all the processing is happening on the other end. Yeah. So yeah, no real requirements around that.
Good, so it's pretty lightweight. So old PCs, repurposing devices is a really good strategy for us for somebody if you're on a tight budget. Right?
Yep, 100%.
A really fast and modern user experience on a really old PC.
I actually had a customer that wanted to re-provision some really old school computers. And what they did was they basically run a really stripped down version of Windows 10 and got rid of the Explorer shell and replaced that with the Windows Virtual Desktop shell instead. Yeah. So that when the machine logs in, it will just automatically open that. They'd have some GPOs, locking down that device. But essentially, this computer that's, like 10 years old was able to just turn on, launch the WVD client, and away they go.
You've got a question here now about group policies and the FSLogix app masking. Would group policies override that? So how do the two of them interact and work side by side?
So with the whole app masking, you obviously need to create a rule set and identify what you want to hide based on that rule set. Now, those rule set files need to live somewhere, right? So you could put them on your file server somewhere that's restricted, or you could put on your net logon server, whatever it is. You could then have a group policy that essentially runs on the daily or whatever, whenever changes are made, that will copy those files on each of the session hosts in that folder in the C program files FSLogix/rules folder. Once those rule set files are placed in that folder, that's when the machines will then hide applications based on assignments from within those rule sets. Now, as a standard user, you can't get to that folder, right? You can't delete. You can probably view it, but you can't delete it. So that's where it would be controlled. And then, in future, if you wanted to look at hiding new applications or whatever it might be. You could have a central store that contains all those rule sets, and then again have a group policy or some sort of script or something to then delete and copy or refresh those rule sets for your users and change permissions and things like that. So essentially it's coming from a central repository somewhere that's being copied to those session hosts to control that. Now when it comes, if you were to use something like the application control in Windows 10, I can't remember the exact name, but when you're basically hiding applications, yes, that and FSLogix might fight against each other. But what the group policy one will do is it would actually remove those applications for all users, right? Whereas the app masking with FSLogix is per group or per AD group or user, whatever it is, and it would only hide it for that specific user. So that's some of the differences between using GPO and the inbuilt Windows application control versus FSLogix. The GPO one will hide it for everybody on that machine, whereas FSLogix will do it, on whatever rule set you've applied.
So we gain some granular control there.
Correct.
Particularly useful in VDI environments.
Yep, definitely, because you don't know who the users are with, like what department they're coming from. You can, essentially everybody can log in. So you want to do it based on their group membership.
Another related question to the app masking, and the question is, how would you prevent users from removing those app masking rules? So I'm going to guess, George, that the users can.
They can't.
So once you set that as an administrator, that's
yep.
set.
Yep. So right now, can a normal user go into program files and delete files? No. So the same would apply to those rule sets. They are actually living in the C program files FSLogix/rules folder. Your standard users can't get to that. And if you have some funny people that like to muck around with them, you could probably put some more rules on there and say that nobody can delete it or whatever it is. But yeah, that's essentially where they live, and by default, users don't have access to that share or that location.
Thanks. There's next questions really about Microsoft authentication and probably some of the stability problems we had with AAD and authentication in the last few months from Microsoft. So the question is really, are we in Microsoft's hands when it comes to that authentication? The concern is that if Microsoft are managing a PaaS platform, then what control do we have?
Yeah,
true for a number of environments, right?
That's actually a really good question, and the short answer is we are in Microsoft hands for that. So if there is a system-wide outage and we can't authenticate against Azure AD, well then no, we can't technically authenticate to the WVD environment. If for whatever reason that were to happen and somebody happened to be logged into the Azure environment at that stage, you could look at if your users were sort of on-prem in a corporate office somewhere, you could allow RDP access as sort of like a temporary workaround or something like that. But essentially,
let me maybe elaborate a little bit on that for everybody on the call and you there. Do you remember when George was explaining the environment setup? There are two parts to the authentication, right? There is the AAD part, which is of course used for things like Office 365 and all those other services. So hear your concerns there, and when Microsoft have problems there, lots and lots of things are impacted, and it is very quickly attended to, and it's a key and core service to the Microsoft cloud. So I would expect that to become more and more robust, but yes, we have seen issues with that, and that's the bit in the WVD solution that just gets us connected at the first thing. So the client connects to that PaaS service in the brokering. Right?
Yep, that's right. It shows us our entitlements and
yeah, so where we can connect to, and then balances that out with your workloads at the back. The second part of the authentication, of course, is more in our control, right? So that is that when we're logging on, the user's logging on to the actual VM and the operating system there, that is just standard AD authentication like you use today on premise. Right? It's exactly the same process. We're in control of that step. And what George was alluding to there, saying if AAD did have a problem, there is always the potential to be able to RDP directly to those machines. That's what you were.
Yep, definitely.
Obviously, I think probably I would hope that would be not a situation that would happen, and I think, but we have seen some issues around that in the past.
Look, I mentioned earlier around RDP short path. Right now, I'm not that is still in public preview, but that could be something that would probably allow users that are already on a corporate network, if they've got line of sight to those VMs and they're trying to connect, then they might not be able to. And there's some sort of cache or something. Microsoft may implement something in that regard to sort of bypass that, but we just don't know. I mean, they could turn around tomorrow and say we could give you a locally cached broker service that you could run in your tenant for such outages, right? We just don't know that.
Yeah. But I mean, look, generally to answer that question is yes. If we have a problem with AAD, then we do have authentication issues with that first layer of WVD. Like nearly every cloud solution that Microsoft uses is dependent on AAD. Although we have seen issues in that in the last few months, I don't think that's a huge concern. I think it's something that Microsoft will get better and better at.
Yep, definitely. I think if something like that were to happen, right, I think there's a bigger problem than just the WVD service if that whole Azure AD went down.
And by the way, just looking at the SLAs for Azure Active Directory, that first tier that we're talking about, that's 99.9%, right? So it's obviously a very key service for Microsoft to be able to maintain.
Yep, definitely.
I'm just going to check, George, make sure there's any more questions coming in. I think we're all good.
So I'm sure a lot of you have been typing your questions away, and I think I've got some of the guys typing back and responding to some of you privately. But hopefully, we've answered a lot of your questions. I mean, if there's anything else that you have, any concerns or anything like that, feel free to reach out and let us know. You could email me directly, or you could just reply to the email that's probably coming out with some of the recorded sessions and a bit more information in the background.
Yeah, absolutely, Josh. So what we'll do after this, guys, as we're heading to wrap up now, is we'll make sure that video is available to you once we've just cleaned it up a little bit. We'll make sure we have all the questions, and we'll reach out to you individually to make sure that we follow up and help you with any further questions that you might have on Akerchi. Did you have anything else, Joe?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, if anybody's interested, next Friday, so Friday the 27th of November, we actually have another workshop that's planning for a cloud server migration. So if any of you are interested in that, looking at going more Azure, sort of picking up your on-prem stuff and moving it into the cloud, whether it be Microsoft Azure or AWS, my colleague Chris will be giving an overview of the Azure migration progress, including some cloud migration triggers, economic triggers and costs that are associated, some common migration projects, as well as some tools, templates and assessments that are available, and some Azure landing zone fundamentals that will make it easy for you to get to the cloud quickly and efficiently. So if you're interested in that, please reach out, or you could go back to the CubeSys website and find the event log there and register for that. So that's this Friday from 10 to 11:30 a.m. if you're interested.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that session with Chris. It should be good to help a bunch of people understand the steps that you need to adopt Azure properly. We've been helping people do that for quite a few years now, and there's a few tricks and tips and things we've learned along the way that we'll be pleased to share with you.
Yep, definitely. Should be a good one. Don't miss it.
Okay. All right. Thanks very much, George. It was a great session. One final thing before we go, I'd love to hear from you what your feedback on the session and what future sessions might include. We've been thinking internally that, and this is sort of feedback directly from our clients, that standing up WVD and getting it working has been the sort of core focus over the last few months. But now our thinking is starting to move to, well, how do we look after it? How do we maintain it? Where can we use DevOps and automation from the Azure platform to make that simple and make that easy for our clients? So that's where our thoughts are going, and be more than happy to have a session on something like that if you feel that would be useful. So please reach out if that's of interest. Okay, we'll wrap up, and thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.